I don't know if you should be listening to this. I'm telling you that up front, as a warning, not for my sake, but for yours. Some stories are just stories, words in the air, harmless and forgotten as soon as they're told. But this one feels different. This one feels heavy, like it has a weight to it. And I've learned that some things, once you give them your attention, they don't let go so easily. They follow. So, if you're the kind of person who gets spooked by a branch scraping against a window in the middle of the night, maybe this isn't for you. Turn it off. Go listen to something else. There's no shame in it. In fact, it's probably the smart thing to do. But if you're still here, well, then I guess you're like me. The kind of person who needs to know what's making the sound. The kind of person who will open the door just a crack, even when every instinct is screaming not to. Just remember that I warned you. And remember that doors, once opened, swing both ways. My name is Marco. Or at least, it was... I'm not sure who I am anymore. I work, or worked, as a geological surveyor for a mining company. It sounds more glamorous than it is. Mostly, it's a lot of solitude. Weeks, sometimes months, spent in remote, forgotten corners of the world, taking soil samples, mapping rock formations, and trying very hard not to think about how far away the nearest hospital is. The job that led me here, to this testimony, I guess you could call it, was in a remote stretch of the Amazon, a part of the world that the maps still label with a certain degree of hopeful speculation. My company had secured exploration rights to a vast, untouched tract of forest, and it was my job to be the tip of the spear, to go in, set up a base camp, and determine if the whispers of rare earth minerals were true. The journey in was a lesson in humility, a rattling, multi-day Jeep ride over roads that were more suggestion than reality, followed by a 2-day trip upriver on a boat that seemed to be held together by rust and stubbornness. My guide, a local man named Silva, was as weathered and as silent as the river itself. He spoke only when necessary, his words sparse and chosen with a careful, deliberate weight. He left me at the drop-off point, a small, overgrown clearing on the riverbank that had once, decades ago, been a logging outpost. All that remained were a few rotting posts and a pervasive sense of being forgotten. As he helped me unload my gear, the tent, the scientific equipment, the carefully rationed supplies, his silence seemed to deepen. When the last crate was on the bank, he did something I hadn't seen him do the entire trip. He looked me directly in the eye. His own eyes were dark and deep, and they held a sadness that seemed as ancient as the forest itself. "You are alone here," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question. It was a statement of profound and undeniable fact. "I'll be fine," I said, trying for a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I have a satellite phone. I'll check in every 3 days. You'll be back in 4 weeks." He nodded slowly, but his gaze didn't waver. He reached into a small pouch at his belt and pulled out a single, dried red pepper, strung on a piece of twine. He handed it to me. "For luck," he said. The words felt inadequate, a small, polite label for a much larger, unspoken sentiment. I took it, a strange, weightless little talisman against the immense, crushing weight of the wilderness around me. He didn't say goodbye. He simply pushed his boat back into the current, and without a single backward glance, he was gone, the chug of his small motor swallowed by the immense, oppressive silence of forest. And then I was alone. The first week was exactly what I had trained for. I was a professional. I had a routine. I set up my camp with a methodical practice efficiency. The large, canvas tent for sleeping and data analysis. A smaller tent for supplies. A fire pit dug and ringed with stones. My days were filled with work. Long, grueling treks into jungle, following seismic maps, taking core samples, marking GPS coordinates. The forest was an overwhelming sensory assault. The air was so thick with humidity, it felt like breathing water. The noise was a constant, deafening symphony of insects, birds, and the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. But at night, a different kind of silence would fall. A deep, watchful, and intensely unnerving silence. The daytime symphony would fade, replaced by a few isolated and strangely articulate sounds. The hoot of an owl, the distant, guttural cry of a howler monkey, and the sound of my own breathing. It was on the third night that I first heard it. I was sitting by my fire, cleaning a piece of equipment. The flames the only point of light in a universe of absolute blackness. And I heard a footstep. It was just one, a single, heavy tread on the soft, damp earth, just beyond perimeter of the firelight. A twig snapping. It was the kind of sound you hear 100 times in the forest. A tapir, maybe a jaguar. But this was different. After the sound, there was nothing. No rustle of leaves as the animal moved away. No grunt or snort. Just a sudden, absolute, and deliberate silence. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I strained my ears, listening for a follow-up, a second footstep, anything. But there was only the crackle of my fire and the frantic, hammering beat of my own heart. I told myself it was nothing. My nerves. The solitude playing tricks on me. But I spent the rest of that night with my hand resting on the handle of my machete, my eyes fixed on the impenetrable wall of darkness that surrounded my small, fragile circle of light. The next day, I found the tracks. I had convinced myself, in the harsh, logical light of morning, that I had imagined the sound. But when I went to retrieve some water from the stream, I saw them. A single line of prints in the soft mud at the water's edge. They were large, bigger than any jaguar track I had ever seen. And they were wrong. They were not the prints of a four-legged animal. They were bipedal. The shape was almost human, but the toes were too long, the heel too deep, and they were not heading towards the stream to drink. They were heading directly towards my camp. I followed them for a short distance. They moved with a strange, loping gait, the prints spaced far apart, and then at the edge of the clearing, they simply stopped, as if the thing that made them had stood there for a very long time, just watching me. A cold, creeping dread began to seep into the edges of my professional calm. This was not a known animal, and it was intelligent. It was curious, and it knew I was here. That night, the sounds returned, but they were different. It was no longer a single footstep. It was a slow, deliberate pacing, back and forth, just beyond the firelight. I could never see it, but I could feel it. A heavy, oppressive presence, a weight in the air that made the humid night feel even more suffocating. Sometimes I would hear a sound that was almost like breathing, a deep, slow, and raspy inhalation, followed by a long, rattling exhalation. It was the sound of a lung, but a lung far larger than any man's. I started to talk to myself, just to hear the sound of a human voice, to remind myself that I was still me, still sane. I would narrate my actions. Marco is now boiling water for coffee. Marco is now entering the GPS coordinates from today's survey. It was a small, pathetic defense against the immense, listening silence. One night, as I was speaking aloud, the pacing stopped. The breathing stopped. I held my breath, listening. And then I heard it, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. It was a voice, a low, guttural, and impossibly deep voice. And it was mimicking me. Marco. It rasped, the single word a perfect, horrifying imitation of my own voice, but pitched down, as if being played through a broken speaker. Marco is now boiling water. I scrambled back, away from the fire, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. I grabbed my rifle, my hand shaking so badly I could barely work the bolt. I stared into the darkness, my eyes wide and useless. The voice did not speak again. After a long, agonizing silence, the slow, deliberate pacing resumed. Back and forth, back and forth. It was not hunting me. It was studying me. It was learning me. And that, I realized, was a far more terrifying prospect. The next 3 weeks were a slow, grinding descent into a new kind of reality. The world I had known, the world of science, of logic, of predictable natural laws, began to fray at the edges. My life became a binary state, the day and the night. During the day, I was a man of science. I forced myself to continue my work. I would trek for miles into the jungle, my rifle slung over my shoulder, my senses screamingly alert. The forest itself seemed to have changed. It was no longer a neutral environment. It felt complicit. The birds would fall silent as I approached. The monkeys would cease their chatter. It was as if the entire jungle was holding its breath, watching me, waiting for the sun to go down. I felt like a trespasser, a foreign body that the forest was trying to reject. I would find signs of its passage. A colossal, three-toed track in the mud, a tree trunk, as thick as my body, scored with deep, claw-like gouges, 10 feet off the ground. But I never saw it. It was always just ahead of me, or just behind me, a ghost that left physical evidence. But the nights belonged to it. It was a constant, oppressive presence. The slow, rhythmic pacing just beyond my firelight was a nightly ritual. The deep, rattling breathing was a soundtrack to my fear. And the voice was its cruelest weapon. It never spoke in full sentences, just fragments. My name, words I had said aloud during the day. It would mimic the sound of my equipment, the zip of my tent, the click of my satellite phone. It was building a vocabulary of my existence, a library of the sounds of my life. I tried to fight back. I built my fire larger. I ringed my camp with a makeshift fence of sharpened sticks. I would shout into the darkness, my voice a thin, pathetic thing against the immense, listening silence. My defiance was met with a contemptuous silence. The pacing would stop for a moment, and then resume, a little closer this time. My satellite phone calls with the home office became a lifeline, a fragile connection to a world where things made sense. I would try to explain what was happening, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. I think something is stalking me. It's bipedal and intelligent. It can mimic my voice. I could hear the strained, polite disbelief on the other end of the line. They told me to stay calm, that I was probably suffering from the effects of prolonged isolation. They promised that Silva would be back on schedule. For more days. Those 4 days were an eternity. The creature grew bolder. The pacing grew closer. The breathing grew louder. It was no longer content to simply observe. It was beginning to interact. It would knock over a stack of sample crates. It would leave a single large muddy footprint in the very center of my camp, just feet from my tent. While I was away during the day, it was leaving me messages. It was telling me that my fences, my fire, my rifle, they were all meaningless. It could get to me whenever it wanted. On the final night, the night before Silva was due to arrive, the game changed. The sun went down and a familiar, oppressive silence descended. I was inside my main tent, trying to eat a cold ration, my hands shaking too badly to light the stove. I had decided not to build a fire. I wanted to be as quiet, as invisible as possible. I was a mouse, hiding in a shoebox, hoping the cat would pass by. The pacing started, as it always did. But this time, it was not outside the camp. It was inside. I could hear the heavy, soft tread of its feet on the earth just outside my tent. I could hear the deep, rattling exhalation, so close that I could almost feel the vibration through the canvas. I lay on my cot, my body rigid, my rifle clutched to my chest. I did not breathe. I did not move. I tried to make myself as small, as insignificant as possible. Then I heard a new sound, a slow, wet, scraping noise. It was the sound of a single, large claw being dragged along the canvas of my tent. It started at the back and moved, with an agonizingly slow deliberation, all the way to the front, stopping right at the zippered flap. My world shrank to the size of that tent. The air was thick and hot, and it tasted my own fear. I stared at the zipper, my eyes burning in the darkness. And then I saw it, a shadow, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette against the faint starlight that filtered through the canvas. It was standing right in front of my door. It was humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs too thin. The head was large and seemed to be hunched down between a pair of high, powerful shoulders. It was like a distorted, nightmarish caricature of man. It did not try to open the tent. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I could hear its breathing, a slow, patient, and impossibly deep rhythm. An hour passed. 2. My muscles screamed in protest. My mind was a frantic, gibbering thing, teetering on the brink of a complete and total collapse. And then, the voice. It was not the raspy, broken mimicry of before. This time, it was a whisper, A soft, clear, and perfectly calm whisper, spoken right next to my ear, as if the creature were inside the tent with me. "I see you," it said. I screamed, a raw, ragged, and utterly animal sound. I scrambled back, away from the door, and in a blind, mindless panic, I fired a rifle. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The muzzle flash illuminated the inside of the tent in a single, stark, and horrifying snapshot. I was alone. I fired again. And again. I emptied the magazine into the canvas, into the shadows, into the night. When the frantic clicking of the empty rifle finally registered, I threw it aside and grabbed my machete. I sliced my way out to the back of the tent, and I ran. I don't know how long I ran. I ran without thought, without direction, fueled by a pure, primal terror that had burned away every last trace of the rational man I had once been. I ran through the jungle, the vines and thorns tearing at my skin, my lungs on fire. I ran until my legs gave out, and I collapsed into a heap at the base of a colossal tree. I lay there, weeping, waiting for the end. I could hear it following me, the slow, deliberate, and unhurried footsteps. It was not chasing me. It was hurting me. It was playing with me. I closed my eyes, and then the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. A deep, profound, and absolute silence. I waited, for a minute, for an hour, for an eternity. It did not come. As the first, faint, gray light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, I realized the truth. It had let me go. It had hunted me. It had cornered me. It had broken me. And then it had simply lost interest. The game was over. I stumbled back to my camp in a daze. It was destroyed. The tents were shredded. The equipment was smashed. My samples, my data, my entire 4 weeks of work were scattered and ruined. It was an act of complete and utter contempt. I was sitting in the ruins of my life when I heard the sound of a motor. Silva, he had come back. He found me there, a hollowed-out, trembling shell of a man. He did not ask what had happened. He did not need to. He simply looked at the destruction, at the single, massive, three-toed footprint in the center of the camp, and he nodded slowly. He helped me gather what little was left of my gear and led me back to the boat. As we were loading the last crate, he finally spoke. His voice was a low, sorrowful whisper. "It knows you now," he said. "It has your voice, your smell. It will not forget." He told me the name, a word from the local Tupi language, a name I had never heard before, a name that was not in any of my books, any of my academic papers. Capelobo. The locals believed it was a man, a shaman who had delved too deep into the dark arts, who had transformed into something that was neither man nor beast, a thing of immense power and immense cruelty, a thing that hunted not for food, but for fear. We traveled downriver in silence, but I knew he was right. I could feel it, a cold, heavy presence in the back of my mind, a watchful, waiting stillness. I had survived, but I had not escaped, and that's the end of the story, or at least the end of my part in it. I never went back to the jungle. I never went back to my old life. I live in a city now, surrounded by millions of people, by concrete and steel and noise. I try to lose myself in the crowd, but sometimes at night, when the city is quiet, I can still hear it. A slow, deliberate pacing, a deep, rattling breath, and a voice, a perfect imitation of my own, whispering a single, terrible word from the darkness. "Marco, I survived, but I did not win. It let me go. I think I know why. A predator that kills its prey gets one meal, but a predator that lets its prey live, a predator that plants a seed of terror in its prey's mind, that predator gets to feed forever. And now I have told you, I have passed the story on. I have planted the seed in you. And I have to wonder, now that you know my story, now that you know its name, will it learn your voice too? What is the greater fear? The monster that kills you in the jungle, or the one that follows you home?